The Boys in the Boat, 9 Americans and Their Epic Quest for Gold at the 1936 Olympics by Daniel James Brown. The story opens on a gray Depression-era Monday in October 1933 in Seattle. The city reflects the hard times. Men sell apples on street corners, soup kitchen lines are long, and shanty towns like Hooverville hug the waterfront. Amidst this gloom, a glimmer of hope appears on the sun-dappled campus of the University of Washington. 2 freshmen, tall and athletic Roger Morris, with his perpetually tousled dark hair, and the equally tall, powerfully built, blonde Joe Rantz, hurry across the campus. They are heading towards the ASUW Shell House, an old Navy seaplane hangar perched on the Mud Lake Cut, hoping to earn a spot on the freshman rowing crew. For Joe, whose worn clothes mark him as different from the more privileged students, securing a place on the crew is more than just athletics. It represents a chance at a guaranteed campus job, the only way he can afford to stay in college and build a future with his sweetheart. Joyce Simdars. Inside the cavernous shell house, gleaming racing shells rest on racks like idols in a cathedral dedicated to rowing. Joe and Roger join 173 other hopefuls gathered on the ramp outside. They are overseen by Tom Bolles, the lean, scholarly freshman coach, and the imposing head coach, Al Ulbrickson. Ulbrickson, a former champion oarsman himself, is a man of few words, impeccably dressed, intense, and driven by an almost religious devotion to Washington rowing. His granite face and piercing gray eyes command instant respect. Observing quietly is Royal Broham, the energetic sports editor for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, eager to chronicle what he hopes will be the rise of Washington rowing, and by extension, Seattle itself, onto the national stage, challenging the dominance of Eastern schools and the growing prowess of their West Coast rival, the University of California at Berkeley. Ulbrickson knows the path to the 1936 Berlin Olympics is long and arduous, starting right here with these untested boys. Simultaneously, thousands of miles away in Berlin, architect Werner March is working under Adolf Hitler's ambitious directive to transform the old Deutsches Stadium into a monumental Reichssportfeld, a stage designed by propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels to showcase Nazi Germany's supposed superiority and modernity to the world during the upcoming Olympics. Joe Rantz's journey to the Shell House dock was far longer and harder than the walk across campus. Born in Spokane in 1914 to Harry Rantz, an inventive tinkerer, and Nellie, a piano teacher, Joe's early life seemed promising. But tragedy struck when Joe was barely 4. His mother died painfully from throat cancer. Grief-stricken, his father fled to Canada, leaving Joe effectively orphaned. Sent east to live with an aunt he barely knew, Joe contracted scarlet fever and spent weeks in isolated misery. A year later, his older brother Fred, now a school superintendent in Idaho with a new wife, Thelma LaFollette, brought Joe back west. Harry Rantz also returned, marrying Thelma's twin sister, Zula, a talented but sensitive violinist, 17 years his junior. Joe moved in with his father and new stepmother in Spokane, finding temporary solace until another fire destroyed their home. The family relocated to a remote Idaho mining camp, Boulder City. While Harry thrived repairing machinery and Joe found adventure exploring the rugged landscape, Thula felt increasingly isolated and resentful. Her dreams of a concert career seemed impossibly distant, and her relationship with Joe frayed. After an incident involving Joe's vegetable garden and his toddler half-brother Mike, Thula demanded Joe leave the house. At 10 years old, Joe was exiled to the camp's one-room schoolhouse, chopping wood for lodging and working in the cookhouse for meals. Utterly alone, he learned profound self-reliance, discovering he could forage for food, like the edible cauliflower mushroom, realizing that value could be found where others saw none. Back in Seattle in the fall of 1933, the grueling reality of crew training commenced. Competitive rowing, the boys quickly learned, was brutal. demanding synchronized power from nearly every muscle, pushing the body to its limits and beyond, demanding endurance for searing pain. Under the watchful eyes of Bolles and Ulbrickson, the freshmen began their education aboard Old Nero, a wide, stable training barge. Here they learned the basics of the stroke, the catch, the drive, the release, the recovery, and the painful consequences of errors, like catching a crab, which could send an oarsman flying into the icy water. Day after day, they rowed on Lake Washington and through the Montlake Cut, their hands blistering, their muscles aching, their spirits tested. Overseeing much of this was George Pocock, the English master boatbuilder who worked in the shell house loft. Born near the Thames, descended from boatbuilders, and a champion rower himself, Pocock brought not only unparalleled technical knowledge, but also a deep, almost spiritual philosophy of rowing, emphasizing discipline, harmony, and the transcendence achieved when a crew becomes one. In 1924, after Joe's exile in Boulder City, Fuller, pregnant again and miserable, forced Harry to leave the mining camp. They moved briefly to Seattle. Then, Harry took a logging job near Hood Canal, leaving 10-year-old Joe with another family. By 1925, Harry had saved enough to buy an auto repair shop in Sequim, a town nestled between the Olympic Mountains and the Strait of Juan de Fuca. The family moved into an apartment above the shop, and Joe enrolled in school. Harry soon bought a stump farm outside town and began building a large farmhouse where the family moved before it was finished. Joe thrived in Sequim, exploring the outdoors, excelling in school, and teaching himself multiple instruments. He became particularly close to a pretty classmate, Joyce Simdars. But Fuller remained unhappy with farm life. The stock market crash of 1929 devastated the family's precarious finances. One rainy November afternoon, Harry, pressured by Fuller, told 15-year-old Joe they were leaving for Seattle, possibly California, and that Joe had to stay behind and make his own way. Abandoned once more, Joe faced his fear and loneliness with grim determination. He would survive on his own terms. He learned to forage, poach salmon from the Dungeness River, sell the fish discreetly, and even bootleg liquor to make ends meet. He took on grueling odd jobs, dynamiting stumps, digging ditches, splitting cedar rails, working on dairy farms, haying fields, growing stronger and more self-reliant. He stayed in school, maintained good grades, and found solace working alongside a neighbor, Charlie McDonald, logging cottonwood trees and learning the valuable skill of splitting cedar shakes. He formed a small band with friends, playing for dances and movie intermissions, which sometimes allowed him to take Joyce on dates, chaperoned by her vigilant mother. Joyce, stifled by her own strict upbringing, admired Joe's resilience and resourcefulness, recognizing a kindred spirit wrestling with self-doubt. In the spring of 1931, Joe proposed to Joyce with a diamond ring he somehow acquired. That summer, Joe's brother Fred invited him to Seattle to finish high school at Roosevelt, hoping it would lead to university. Joe accepted, moving in with Fred and Thelma. He excelled academically and athletically, particularly in gymnastics, where his strength caught the eye of Al Ulbrickson. After graduating with honors, Joe returned to Sequim for a year of hard labor, including road work with the CCC, saving money for college. He and Joyce deepened their bond before he finally left for the University of Washington in the fall of 1933. The 1933 fall training season wore on through deteriorating weather. As temperatures dropped and cold rains lashed Lake Washington, the freshman candidates dwindled. Joe and Roger Morris were among the 80 remaining boys promoted from Old Nero to the more tippy, shell-like training barges. Both boys endured demanding schedules. Roger walked miles daily, attended engineering classes, rowed, worked for his family's moving company, and played in a swing band. Joe juggled classes, crew practice, a late-night job at the student store, and janitorial work at the YMCA in exchange for a dismal basement room. Still feeling like an outsider, teased as Hobo Joe for his single, worn sweater, Joe found solace in occasional dates with Joyce. now working as a live-in maid after a difficult search. As the world outside darkened, the Dust Bowl began. Hitler withdrew Germany from the League of Nations. The freshman crew pushed on. In late November, after a final frigid workout, Bolles announced the lineups for the top 2 boats. Joe Rantz was named to the number 3 seat and Roger Morris to the bow seat of the first freshman boat. Rowing together that evening on Lake Union under the city lights, Joe felt an overwhelming sense of belonging and purpose. Tears welling in his eyes for the first time since his abandonment. He returned to Sequim for Christmas break, a local hero. Training resumed in January 1934 under relentless rain. The top freshmen moved into sleek Pocock racing shells, facing an intensified schedule geared towards the April showdown with California and the June Poughkeepsie regatta. The Washington varsity, meanwhile, struggled, lacking spirit after their Poughkeepsie defeat the previous year. Ulbrickson was particularly frustrated, confiding harsh critiques to his logbook. One evening, the freshman boat stunned everyone by racing the varsity to a dead heat, signaling their potential. 600 miles south, Cal's coach Kai Ebright faced similar varsity woes but remained confident in his own impressive freshman crew, boasting they would crush Washington. The fierce rivalry between Ulbrickson and Ebright, both UW alumni, intensified. Fueled partly by Ebright's lingering resentment over being passed over for the Washington job and his suspicions about the Pocock shells he was forced to buy from his rival's home base. Pocock, a man of deep integrity, found himself caught in the middle, his business suffering in the depression while fending off Ebright's accusations. As spring approached, the Washington freshmen fell into a slump. Their rowing grew sloppy, their focus lost, the mind in boat. Mantra wasn't working. Bolles experimented with lineups, briefly demoting Joe, whose inconsistent technique remained problematic, though the boat inexplicably slowed without him. Joe, anxious about his precarious position, redoubled his efforts. The slump finally broke in late March. In early April, rowing against the JV and varsity, the freshmen again demonstrated shocking speed, finishing far ahead of the others. Bolles kept their record time a secret. Meanwhile, Ebright arrived in Seattle, publicly downplaying his crew's chances while privately knowing his freshmen were exceptionally fast. Race day, April 13th, 1934, dawned bright and warm. Tens of thousands lined Lake Washington or boarded the observation train and ferry. In the freshman race, Washington, rowing at a controlled, powerful 30 strokes per minute, methodically overtook Cal's initially faster boat, winning by a commanding 4.5 lengths and smashing the course record. Joe and Joyce celebrated exuberantly on the ferry deck. Later, the Washington varsity edged Cal in a thrilling record-setting race, giving Washington a clean sweep. Joe and the freshmen watched Ulbrickson's strategy unfold. Stay close, conserve energy, then unleash a devastating final sprint. A lesson in confidence and knowing your opponent's limits. Days later, the freshmen fell into another slump. Bolles, exasperated, threatened to rebuild the crew for Poughkeepsie. But as the weather turned foul again in May, the boys paradoxically began rowing better in the rough water. Pocock declared them a fine rough water boat. As good as any I had seen, the Poughkeepsie trip was on. The train journey east was a boisterous adventure for the inexperienced boys, marred only when Joe's attempts at singing cowboy songs were met with ridicule, deepening his feelings of being an outsider. In Poughkeepsie, they faced harsh conditions, oppressive heat, unfamiliar river currents, dilapidated lodging, and meager food. They were entering the storied world of the Poughkeepsie Regatta, the de facto national championship, long dominated by elite Eastern schools. Washington's previous victories had shocked the establishment, pitting gritty Westerners against Eastern privilege. The 1934 freshman race saw Washington, rowing serenely at a low stroke rate, demolish the defending champion Syracuse crew by an astonishing 5 lengths, looking utterly composed at the finish. The national press was stunned. The Washington JV also won handily. In the 4-mile varsity race, however, California, powered by gigantic Dick Burnley at stroke, edged Washington in the final quarter mile, securing Ebright's second consecutive IRA title and fueling speculation about Cal's 1936 Olympic prospects. Ulbrickson returned to Seattle defeated again in the race that mattered most to him and facing uncertainty about his job. Joe, meanwhile, journeyed home alone, traveling through the heartland as the Dust Bowl disaster worsened, witnessing the westward migration of desperate families, a stark reminder of the nation's fragility and his own precarious position. Back in Seattle, the violent West Coast longshoremen's strike underscored the era's turmoil, while President Roosevelt's visit to the Grand Coulee Dam site offered a contrasting vision of collective effort and hope. Joe spent the summer working with Charlie McDonald, mastering the art of splitting cedar shakes, finding a deep, almost spiritual connection to the wood, its resilience mirroring the qualities he sought in himself. The start of the 1935-36 season crackled with Olympic ambition. Ulbrickson announced the drive for Berlin would begin immediately. Intense rivalry flared between the returning crews. Ulbrickson initially kept Joe's champion sophomore boat intact, but listed them perplexingly as the fifth boat, dampening their swagger. Joe, financially strapped and emotionally raw after finally locating his estranged family, struggled. He and Joyce visited his father, Harry, and his half-siblings at their modest Seattle home. Thula, however, coldly barred Joe from their lives. Joe confided in Joyce his need to suppress anger and focus solely on self-reliance. He retreated into the familiar world of the shell house, finding solace in its routines. Though the teasing about his background continued, he bonded with Stub McMillan, another working-class rower, over their shared janitorial duties. Seeking guidance, Joe began visiting George Pocock in his loft. Pocock shared his craft and his philosophy, speaking of the stories held within wood, the lessons of resilience and harmony, urging Joe to trust his crewmates, to open his heart. The conversations deeply affected Joe. Meanwhile, in Germany, the 1935 Nuremberg Rally enacted the infamous Nuremberg Laws, stripping Jews of citizenship and rights, intensifying persecution, and fueling the Olympic boycott debate in the US, a debate the anti-boycott forces, led by Avery Brundage, ultimately won. Joe's emotional turmoil increased when Thula died, suddenly, of septicemia. Visiting his grieving father and half-siblings, Joe was stunned when Harry announced plans to build a new house where they could all live together, offering Joe a home for the first time in years. Confused and mistrustful, Joe retreated further into rowing. Brutal winter training commenced amidst record cold and snow. Ulbrickson relentlessly pushed the crews. Joe, demoted again to the third boat, struggled with focus and form, his Olympic dream seeming to slip away, especially after learning his beloved mentor Charlie McDonald had been killed in a car crash. Unbeknownst to Joe, Pocock continued to observe him closely, discussing him with Ulbrickson. The final push for the 1936 Olympics began. Ulbrickson, having decided this was his all-or-nothing year, started mixing crews, searching for the perfect combination. After Pocock's counsel about trusting his crewmates resonated deeply during a solitary moment on the dock, Joe returned to practice transformed. On March 21st, Ulbrickson placed Joe in the number 7 seat of the promising second boat, alongside Roger Morris, Chuck Day, Johnny White, Gordy Adam, Stub McMillan, Shorty Hunt, Stroke Don Hume, and coxswain Bobby Mock. The boat immediately clicked. The boys found their swing, that elusive, perfect harmony where rowing feels effortless. Ulbrickson made the change permanent. This was his Olympic boat. They christened their new Pocock shell the Husky Clipper. In early April, they smashed the 3-mile course record. Ulbrickson finally had his crew. Kai Ebright, meanwhile, remained confident in his Cal Bears, who were posting phenomenal times on the Oakland estuary. The 1936 Pacific Coast Regatta on Lake Washington became a showdown. After easy wins by the Washington freshmen and JV crews, the varsity race pitted the untested Husky Clipper crew against Cal's defending national champions. Washington employed Ulbrickson's come-from-behind strategy, brilliantly executed by Bobby Mock. Rowing at a deceptively low rate, they stayed just off Cal's stern for over 2 miles before unleashing a devastating sprint in the final mile, winning by 3 lengths and shattering the course record again. Seattle erupted, convinced their boys were Berlin-bound. The train trip east for the Poughkeepsie Regatta was optimistic. Ulbrickson, Bolles, and Pocock refined the low-stroke race plan. In Poughkeepsie, the Washington crews moved into better quarters next door to Cal, complete with hot showers and the marvelous cooking of Evander May calamar. Tensions remained high between the rivals. Ulbrickson learned Ebright had strengthened his Cal lineup, making them favorites again. Washington's final time trial was deceptively slow publicly, but secretly faster than Cal's best reported time. The night before the race, the varsity boys experienced a moment of perfect, silent rowing in the dark on the Hudson, reinforcing their bond. Race day, June 22, 1936, saw Washington's freshmen and JV crews win their races commandingly. In the varsity final, Mock again held the crew back, falling dangerously far behind Cal, Navy, and Penn. Ulbrickson despaired, but Mock unleashed the crew at the 3-mile mark. In a breathtaking final mile, they surged past the field, caught Cal in the final 200 yards, and won by a length, completing the first ever Poughkeepsie sweep and cementing their status as national champions. Ulbrickson, though thrilled, immediately refocused them on the upcoming Olympic trials. A week later, the crew arrived at Princeton for the trials. After easily winning their preliminary heat despite a slow time, they faced Cal, Penn, and the New York Athletic Club in the final on July 5th. Overcoming another poor start, they rowed a masterful 2,000-meter race, again conserving energy before unleashing a powerful sprint to win by a length, securing their Olympic berth. The victory celebration was cut short when Olympic officials demanded Washington raise $5,000 for their passage to Berlin. A frantic statewide fundraising campaign back in Washington succeeded within 48 hours. The boys, largely shielded from the drama, headed to the New York Athletic Club's facility at Travers Island to train and relax before sailing. They explored New York City, becoming minor celebrities, and Joe, atop the Empire State Building, felt the weight and pride of representing his country. Bobby Mock received a startling letter from his father revealing their hidden Jewish heritage. The team sailed for Germany on the SS Manhattan on July 15th amidst fanfare. Life aboard was a mix of light training, camaraderie, feasting, after Ulbrickson intervened, and witnessing the controversial expulsion of swimmer Eleanor Holm for drinking. They arrived in Hamburg on July 24th, receiving enthusiastic welcomes there and in Berlin, where the city, meticulously staged by Goebbels, presented a facade of charm and efficiency, concealing the escalating Nazi persecution. The crew settled into the police academy in Köpenick, near the Grunau rowing course. Initial practices on the Langer See were poor. The Husky Clipper was damaged and needed Pocock's repair. Don Hume remained sick, and the crew struggled with the unfamiliar, wind-swept course. Tensions rose, leading to minor clashes with other international teams. Ulbrickson grew concerned about the powerful German and Italian crews and the formidable British 8 from the Leander Club. He was particularly worried about the unfair lane assignments for the Olympic races, which clearly favored Germany and Italy. As the preliminary heats neared, the boys drew closer, finding strength in their shared purpose. On August 12th, despite another bad start and a still ailing Hume, they rowed a brilliant heat, strategically conserving energy before powering past Great Britain in the final stretch to win, setting a new world and Olympic record. Hume collapsed afterward, but recovered. The victory gave them a crucial day off while their main rivals battled through repechage heats. Germany, Italy, and Great Britain all qualified, setting the stage for the final. Ulbrickson learned with dismay that the USA had drawn the worst lane, Lane 6, for the gold medal race, heavily disadvantaging them if the wind blew. Race day, August 14th, was cold, rainy, and windy. Hume was feverish, and Ulbrickson initially decided he couldn't row. The crew protested vehemently, insisting they needed Hume, promising to carry him if necessary. Ulbrickson relented. As tens of thousands packed the Grunau course, including Hitler and his entourage, the final race began. Moke missed the start signal in the wind. The Americans were left at the line, spotting the field a disastrous lead. Rowing into a fierce crosswind in the exposed sixth lane, they struggled, falling far behind the leading German and Italian crews in the sheltered lanes. Hume appeared dazed, unresponsive to Moke's calls. At the halfway mark, they were nearly 5 seconds back, effectively in last place. Moke, desperate, considered drastic measures, but just past 1,200 meters, Hume suddenly revived. Moke called for a higher rate. The crew responded, finding their swing again, moving relentlessly up through the field. Entering the final 500 meters, they were still a length behind Germany and Italy. The roar of the German crowd chanting Deutschland, Deutschland was deafening. Moke couldn't be heard. He pounded the tiller knockers. The boys, sensing the urgency, dug deeper than ever, hitting an impossible 44 strokes per minute. In the last 200 meters, they surged alongside the leaders. The three boats crossed the line almost simultaneously. After an agonizing pause, the results were announced. USA first, by 0.6 of a second over Italy, 1 second over Germany. The crew had won Olympic gold. Joe Rantz and the boys returned home heroes, celebrated with a ticker-tape parade in New York and acclaim across the nation. Joe married Joyce the day they both graduated in 1939. He went on to a successful career as a chemical engineer at Boeing. He and Joyce raised 5 children in Lake Forest Park, near Lake Washington. He pursued his love of working with cedar in retirement. The other boys also built successful careers and families. They remained lifelong friends, bonded forever by their shared experience, holding reunions for decades, rowing the Husky Clipper together periodically until age and infirmity finally claimed them, one by one. Joe, the boy who had survived abandonment and hardship through sheer will, died peacefully in 2007, surrounded by the loving family Joyce had vowed he would always have. Roger Morris, his first friend on the crew, was the last to pass away in 2009. The Husky Clipper now hangs suspended in the University of Washington's Conybeare Shell House. An inspiration to new generations of rowers who gather beneath her each fall, ready to test themselves, just as the boys in the boat did 80 years before. If you enjoyed this book breakdown, please consider liking this video and subscribing to get notified when we post our next book.